What we do is we put the leg here and just use it to slow us slightly while we tuck and protect ourselves. The number 2 cause of injuries when people go down to the ground is that they don't get their leg mobile. They don't use it as a piston. They try and use it as a brace and they end up falling on it. And when they fall on it, they break something. The other point that's really important to understand about why you have to have the mobility in your leg is that not only is it going to slow you down, but once you're braced for impact, you're going to reapply it to make this guy's life real miserable. Now, most people, when they're faced with going over backwards, instinctively put their hands out to catch themselves. Now, while that may be an instinctive move, it's not really a good one, because when you go over, you end up landing on them. And if you land on them, you run the high risk of breaking them. The other problem that you're likely to encounter is that as you're going over backwards, you may want to put your hands down, but you're up close with the guy and you're fighting. So you don't really have your time to get your hands down there. What this technique of tucking and rolling will do is you won't have to worry about catching yourself so much because you'll have the experience rolling and rocking. Now, if you hit your point of no return, one of the things you can do to counter that is to squat. Squat. Now this action does 2 things. Number 1 is it lessens the fall, right? You have less distance to go. Number 2 is that if you've been training doing the drills that I told you, you're more familiar with falling from this position. The real nice thing about it is, though, is that occasionally you'll be able to spin the guy off as he's doing it. You've suddenly shifted your center of gravity lower, so when he attacks, instead of going over, I can make him there. Now, even if he takes me with him, I can land on him and he lands on the bottom. There are all sorts of rolls that you can do, but if I were to try and show you all of them, it would fill up this entire video. So what I want to do is just touch on a few critical points on each of them before I move on. A side roll is a situation that you're going over sideways. What you don't want to do is land on your shoulder here. So as you're going over sideways, begin to tuck, curl up like this. And what that does is it brings your shoulder blade into play, and that's where you want to land. If you try and touch your shoulders together, you've turned your back into a ball, so you can roll this way instead of landing like this, which is a much harder landing. There's another type of fall, which is a real nasty one, and that's where you kind of land in between your head and your neck, or your head and your shoulders, and you land this way. If you've ever been bucked off horse, you know that fall. That is easy to handle if what you do, tuck your head down, and then take your shoulder, try and touch it to your nipple. What that does is it begins you to curl up this way. So instead of hitting like this, you once again hit on your shoulder, and you hit like this. Another point is if you're laying on the ground. Laying on the ground rolling is something a lot of people don't spend much time thinking about, but the truth of the matter is, if you don't tuck things in, there's all sorts of things to hit on and catch. So as you roll, remember to tuck close. Because if you have things sticking out, it's a harder roll. Now, excuse me, naturally I'm going to recommend once again, you don't start out high, you start out low. Do it at a gym, do it with mats, do it with a professional gymnastics instructor or a judo instructor, somebody who can show you the finer points of rolling. Also, train your stupid side. We all have sides that can do something very well, very quickly. And we all have sides that are a little less adept. If you're right-handed, do 20 rolls this way, practicing it that way. But do 40 rolls on your left side, because your right side will catch on a whole lot quicker than your left will. So you have to train more, you have to train your denser side more. Another point where I veer away from traditional grappling arts is in the fall. A lot of the falls show people to go down and to take the energy in what's called a break fall. They take and they slap the mat. That absorbs most of the energy. So the guy goes over backwards. What I have just done by slapping that mat is I've absorbed the energy of the fall into the ground. I personally prefer a more dynamic method where what I do, and this comes from my gymnastic training I should point out, is I utilize the energy of the fall to get myself into a preparatory position. So if I go over backwards, I roll and I get back up. This is a matter of me whipping myself into a position where I can get up. If I'm going over sideways, for example, and I'm here, if I slap the mat, I've stopped all the energy. I don't want to do that. On the other hand, if I go over this way, I can roll and come into a preparatory position where I can get up. This is largely contingent on what type of throw or how you're going down to the ground. If you're down on the ground, if you're on your back, you're rolling, you can kick in extra energy to get yourself up. I suggest that you practice with this, work on it, roll around on mats, find out where you can do it and where you can't. I have had more sanctimonious, never been in a real fight but studied some style for 20 years martial artists tell me that I'm overreacting to the danger of a longhorn tackle. Now, they say they have all these techniques that will work against somebody charging you. And yeah, that's true, they do. If the guy starts over here. You're in a situation, the guy comes out like this, boom, he gives you all sorts of time to come up with a fancy technique that'll work. And like I said, the techniques a lot of times will work. However, the reality of the situation is the guy won't be charging from over there. He'll be trying to take you down from here. Now this happens a lot of times that you're fighting, boom, and you just end up clinching. Hard to avoid. The other way that you can get rushed this way is you're there, you're beating on the guy, you're doing great, and he suddenly realizes he's losing. And what does he do? He closes on you. You both end up going down. Now, it's hard to fight a determined grappler. Somebody who is determined to tackle you, to take you down, is really difficult to resist. Look at the Ultimate Fighting Championships. Living proof right there. The way to learn this is don't work with somebody who's cooperating. But honestly, go out and have a buddy of yours who used to play football. Have him tackle you and see how easy it is to resist this. And the most important safety tip number 3. Train for probabilities, not possibilities. Chris Karachi has a saying which is, train as you live, live as you train. Good advice. I would advise also that what you do is study how human beings act and behave. Watch for general patterns. See what you notice the most, what happens the most. If you train for what happens most often, you'll be able to handle most of what happens. We've covered how to minimize the damage to yourself when going to the ground. But now it's time to focus on maximizing the damage to him for the same trip. Remember how I said the human body moves in circles? It's harder for me to move him in a straight line than it is for me to move him in a circle. Now, if he is charging and closing with me, what I can do is to spin it. Now, this is not a grab, throw. This is instead, when he closes with me, we spin and go down, and he lands on the bottom. Now, there's a lot of stuff that can go into that, but the main thing is to spin your body so he hits first. As you're going, all you do is spin. Now, the way to practice this is to, by your bed, stand by the side of your bed, fall over, and begin to twist. By the time you get to the point of where you can land on your side with your bed, you're probably ready to move on to the next step, which is go to a gym where they have a mat and practice as you fall over, spinning. So it looks something like this, going over backwards. The main thing is to spin your body so he hits first. No matter how you land, make his landing nasty as possible. If you're coming down on top, if you've managed to do the spin that I was talking about, plant the elbow. Okay, get the knee into him. Make sure that he has that little extra to remember you by. So when you come down, slam the elbow in. Now, if you're on the other side of the coin, and you're on the downside, remember how I mentioned your leg is acting as a piston? That same action that was slowing your descent now comes up to get your knee up so he lands on it. Now, landing this way with him on top does three things. Now, number one, it hurts him. He's going to land with his entire body weight on this, and it spears him. It doesn't do him any good. Number two is from this position, he's going to slide off an angle. He's not going to fall directly onto me. He's going to go off one way or the other. This is important. But most important, what getting this elbow up does is it prevents anything nasty along the same lines that he's got coming at you from reaching you. So boom, I'm safe from this arm bar. If my elbow wasn't up there, his entire weight would be on my throat. Don't want that to happen. Speaking of arm bars across the throat, actually an arm bar is harder to break than a stranglehold. Strangleholds are easy. You just snake your arm over, break. Okay. Where he comes in over, he pins this arm, then with this hand, he takes them and levers me off him. Crosses me up, he can throw me down, I go all the way down. Pretty easy to do that. An arm bar across the throat, however, is a little more difficult to break because the guy's bearing his weight on you. And what you have to do with those is as the guy's bearing down, snake through, take control of his elbow here. The inside of his elbow is where you will break this. Grab the back of his head, straighten out. You gotta come up, so snake through, straighten out, and then drop the elbow in. Okay? It's just real simple. You get your hand there, straighten it, drop the elbow. Pretty effective. Unfortunately, that doesn't work if you have a bigger guy on top of a little guy. What you have to do in those circumstances is as he's bearing down with an arm bar, is do the same action, but also grab his hand here and break. So I've now crossed him up, I can take him head down. Okay? Like I said, against the bigger guy, you gotta use this other hand. Against same size guy, drop your elbow in there, just take him out. The next issue I want to address is breaking a chokehold. There are three main types of chokeholds that you can run up against. And the answer to all of them is pretty much the same thing. The starting point is you need to turtle up. That means tuck your chin in and lift your shoulders. Right? The tucking your chin in protects your trachea. The lifting your shoulders protects your carotid arteries. Now, the three types are, number one is the blood flow. Now in this one, the trachea is in the crook of the arm, and by applying pressure this way, like a nutcracker, I cut the flow off to his brain. Now this is a really good technique, and it takes about 7 seconds to take somebody down this way. It is what the police chokeholds are supposed to be. This is probably the safest way to do a chokehold, but I'm not recommending you do chokeholds, by the way. I'm also saying that if you do ever learn how to do a chokehold, go learn from a professional. Also learn CPR and EMT training. But the second type of chokehold, and this can lead to physical damage if not death, is the arm bar across the throat. Unlike the first one, which cuts off the blood, this cuts off the airflow. This takes a little longer. The guy's more likely to fight. And what also happens with this is that you do it, the trachea is very likely to swell and or collapse, and the person will choke to death. This is why the chokehold is such a controversial move, is if the guy's fighting too hard, you can be trying to get a blood chokehold and the guy will fight, and you'll end up putting a forearm chokehold on him, and that cuts him off. You put him in a drunk tank, swells, he dies, you have a suit on your hand. The third type of chokehold is much more brutal, and that is a combination of both with the added twist of it's basically designed to snap the guy's neck. The counter to all of these chokeholds is, as I said, you turtle up. That's the start. But the wonder cure of them all is simply putting your hand to your face. What that does is it protects you against this type of closeout. It can protect you this way, and naturally, with your hand up there, you can push back and keep him from getting the leverage he needs to snap your neck. To get out of a chokehold, your main trick is to simply get the guy's arm off your neck. The best way to do that is via his hand. So if he's up here, what you do is just reach up, grab his thumb, and peel straight down. Simple peeling action, just takes the hand right off. Something you should also know is if you're laying on your stomach, it is most likely that an untrained fighter who is, if he's not a professional and he's trying to cuff you or something like that, an untrained fighter, don't worry, will try and choke you out. He'll try and come up this way. That's something you have to watch for, you have to be very careful of. That's why turtling up will help you. Now, a point that I veer away from traditional grappling attitudes with is when it comes to being on the ground with a guy, I believe in getting away. I don't want to stay down there with the guy. Staying on the ground with the guy while his buddies are around leads to them just kicking your kidneys into guacamole. I don't like that. Now, one point that a lot of grapplers come from is what's called the ready position, and that's this. From this position, by grabbing my head and pulling me down, he keeps me from rearing up and popping. Makes a lot of good sense. I agree with that. Generally speaking, though, what you want to do is keep the guy from getting up on top of you. And to do this, you do it by a thing called bridging. You take his back leg, goes out like that.